in the heart of a quiet village in southern Nigeria, where the earth was red and the winds whispered secrets through the palm trees, lived a man named Oba, a respected palm wine tapper, widowed, and the father of a soft-spoken girl named Ijeoma. She was only 12, and had the kind of innocence that made even strangers smile. Oba, who loved his daughter dearly, decided to remarry, not because he had forgotten his late wife, but because he thought Ijeoma needed a mother's love. The woman he chose was called Adaku. She was 38 years old, tall and graceful, with skin as smooth as ripe ube and eyes like deep forest shadows. Her hair was always braided into a crown that shimmered with tiny golden cowries, and the villagers often whispered, "She walks like someone who knows things." At first, Adaku seemed gentle. She smiled easily, brought Ijeoma bush mangoes, and hummed lullabies in a language no one recognized. But as the moon changed, so did she. Ijeoma began to hear things at night, soft chants, footsteps in the ceiling, shadows dancing behind her door. Then came the first dream. Her mother, weeping, covered in ash, whispering, "Your new mother is not what she seems." And that was when the fear began. That night, the village was strangely silent. No crickets, no frogs, not even the usual hoot of the night owl. Ijeoma lay in her raffia mat, staring at the bamboo roof, heart pounding like the talking drum of the Igwe's palace. She tried to sleep, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of burnt herbs and palm oil. Then, just as the moon slipped behind a cloud, she heard it again. A soft humming. Low, rhythmic, unnatural. She crept to her window, careful not to wake her father, who had returned home drunk and snoring. Outside, by the mango tree, Adaku stood barefoot, her cowrie-studded braids glinting in the darkness. But she wasn't alone. 3 other women stood in a circle with her, all dressed in red wrappers, faces hidden under white chalk and charcoal. Their hands moved in strange patterns, their voices rising together like a twisted lullaby. Ijeoma gasped. One of them turned sharply, as if she had heard. And in that instant, the girl's heart froze. Adaku slowly raised her head. Her eyes glowed faintly like embers in a dying fire. And for a moment, she smiled. But it was not a mother's smile. It was cold, crooked, and full of knowing. Ijeoma stumbled back into her mat, covered herself with a wrapper, and whispered a prayer her late mother used to teach her. "Let no shadow swallow me. Let no stranger steal my soul." From that moment on, Ijeoma knew she was not safe in her own home. And yet, the worst was still to come. The following morning, the sun rose lazily over the village. But Ijeoma felt no warmth. She stared at Adaku during breakfast, watching the woman's every move. Adaku smiled as she stirred the yam porridge. But her eyes never blinked. Not once. "Eat, my child," she said softly. Her voice sweet, but laced with something that felt hollow, like a gourd with nothing inside. Ijeoma pretended to chew, but every bite tasted like ash. She excused herself and ran to the backyard, where her late mother's old calabash still hung from the tree. It had always been a sacred spot, her mother used to say. The spirits hear best from under the mango tree. So Ijeoma knelt, placed her forehead to the earth, and whispered, "Mama, if you can hear me, Please protect me." The wind rustled just once. Then, silence. Suddenly, a lizard darted across her feet, startling her, and behind her, a deep voice called, "Talking to yourself, little bird?" It was Adaku, standing with folded arms, and eyes that no longer smiled. "You mustn't whisper to the dead, Ijeoma," she said with a grin that made the child's spine crawl. "They never forget, and they never forgive." Then she turned and walked away, her golden cowries clicking like bones. That night, the dream returned, but this time, her mother was not alone. Standing beside her was a dark figure, headless, but pointing straight at Adaku. It was after that second dream that Ijeoma's curiosity became a need, a desperate itch for the truth. She began to watch Adaku more closely, memorizing her movements, the way she picked certain leaves from the bush only at midnight, the way she whispered into bowls of water before handing them to Oba. One afternoon, while her father was away in the palm grove, Adaku left the compound, saying she was going to the market. But instead of heading to the main road, she took a narrow path into the forest. Ijeoma followed from a distance, heart-thudding, hiding behind trees. But Adaku vanished. Just like that. Gone, into the wind. Confused and afraid, the girl returned home, and that's when she noticed something new. A door at the back of the hut. It had always been there, but sealed shut, covered in red cloth and palm fronds. Her father had warned her, "Never touch that door. It's sacred." But now, something told her to open it. Her hands trembled as she reached for the knot of raffia that sealed it. As she loosened the rope, a sudden gust of wind blew through the compound. The red cloth rose like a snake. Inside the room, it was cold. Colder than harmattan. There were no windows, but the room pulsed with a strange glow. Clay pots, bones as feathers, and a mirror that seemed to breathe. Then, she saw it. Her mother's wrapper, the exact one she was buried in, hanging from the wall like a trophy. Ijeoma's scream caught in her throat. She backed out of the room, hands shaking. Just then, she heard a footstep behind her. "Curiosity," Adaku whispered from the shadows, "is how cats lose their souls." Oba noticed a change in his daughter. She barely spoke, barely ate, and her eyes carried shadows far too deep for a child. "Ijeoma," he asked gently one evening, "what troubles your heart?" She wanted to scream, to tell him everything. But when she opened her mouth, her throat tightened, as if something held her voice hostage. "I'm fine, Papa," she whispered. That night, during the village drum circle, Ijeoma sat alone near the fire. The elders beat the igba, the youth danced, and the moon watched from above. Then, the chief drummer, an old man with a white beard and blind eyes, paused mid-beat. His head turned sharply toward Ijeoma. "You," he said in a gravelly voice, "you carry a scent, not of this world." The drumming stopped. Everyone turned to stare. "Your aura," he continued, "is tainted with the dust of the forbidden." Adaku, who had been sitting nearby, laughed softly. "Old age is turning your tongue loose," she said. But the old man didn't flinch. He held out a small leather drum, handed it to Ijeoma and said, "When the spirits are near, beat this once. If your truth is pure, they will answer." She clutched the drum to her chest, unsure whether to feel hope or dread. because deep down, she knew something dark had already taken root in her home. That night, long after the drumming had faded and the fires died out, Ijeoma sat under the mango tree, clutching the small leather drum. Her fingers trembled. Her chest tightened. But she knew the time had come. She struck the drum. Once. The sound echoed, louder than it should have, then faded into the night like a voice swallowed by a cave. At first, nothing happened. But then, the air thickened. The leaves stopped moving. And a single black feather dropped from the sky, right into her lap. She picked it up slowly, cautiously, and gasped. Blood. The feather dripped warm blood. Suddenly, a whisper curled into her ear, cold as death. She was chosen, not born. Ijeoma looked around. No one was there. But the whisper continued, coming from nowhere and everywhere. Adaku is not your stepmother. She is a vessel. The Coven feeds through her. Tears spilled down Ijeoma's cheeks. She remembered her mother's voice, her laughter, her prayers. Had her spirit been trapped? Had Adaku used her for something unholy? A distant chant rose from the forest, and Ijeoma knew. Adaku was with them again. She held the bleeding feather close to her heart and whispered, "Mama, guide me." The wind answered. And this time, it was not empty. Oba was changing too. He no longer told stories by the fireside, no longer danced when the palm wine touched his lips. Instead, he stared blankly, moving like a shadow of himself. "Papa," Ijeoma asked one day, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you still pray?" Oba blinked slowly. Then chuckled, but the sound was dry, joyless. "Prayers," he muttered, "who listens anymore?" Adaku stood behind him, smiling, brushing his shoulder with a hand that lingered too long. She looked at Ijeoma and winked. Ijeoma's stomach twisted. Something had taken her father, not his body, but his will. Later that evening, she went into the forest to fetch firewood, but the deeper she went, the heavier her legs felt. Like the earth didn't want her there. She stumbled upon a shrine she had never seen before, small, covered in snail shells and feathers. And behind it, a wooden carving of a woman with cowrie-braided hair. Identical to Adaku. Written beneath it, in ancient Nsibiti symbols, were the words, "Mother of many. Keeper of ash." Ijeoma ran. Branches tore her wrapper, thorns pierced her feet. But she didn't stop until she reached home. That night, Oba looked at her with blank eyes and said, "Your mother was weak. But Adaku is power." Ijeoma broke. Something had stolen her father's soul. Back in the forbidden room, Ijeoma returned. This time, she waited for Adaku to leave at dawn, pretending to go to the stream, and slipped quietly into the room with the breathing mirror. The walls groaned like they were alive. She walked slowly, whispering old prayers from her mother's hymnal, holding the bloody feather like a charm. Then she stood before the mirror. At first, she saw only her reflection, tired, thin, eyes wide with fear. But then, the glass shifted and showed her the past. She saw Adaku in a clearing, younger, kneeling before an old woman who painted her face with blood and ashes. She heard voices. "You will never bear a child. But you will harvest the daughters of others." Then, she saw her own mother, alive, carrying baby Ijeoma through the same forest. Adaku watched from the shadows, eyes gleaming. The image cracked. Another vision followed, her mother crying beside Oba's sickbed, while Adaku danced around a fire, chanting in tongues. Finally, the night of her mother's death. Adaku, standing over her mother's lifeless body, placing something into her mouth, a black stone, glowing. Ijeoma screamed. The mirror shattered. And from the shards, a voice hissed. Now you see. The next full moon was a blood moon. Ijeoma had heard the elders speak of it, a time when the spiritual veil is thinnest, when covens rise and ancestors whisper. She had to act fast. She carried the drum, the feather, and the largest shard of the mirror to the oldest woman in the village, Mama Ijeoma, the herbalist. The woman listened quietly, eyes closed, breathing slowly. Then she opened her eyes and said, "You are marked, but not forsaken." Mama Ijeoma revealed that Adaku belonged to the Midnight Circle, a secret cult of women who could not give life, so they stole it. They trap spirits, she explained, especially of women who die young or in childbirth. That's how they grow stronger. Ijeoma wept. Mama's spirit, is she gone? Mama Ijeoma placed her hand on the child's chest. No, she said, she's still with you. But if Adaku completes the final ritual on the blood moon, she will be lost forever. What can I do? Ijeoma asked, voice trembling. The old woman handed her a charm, made of goat bone, red thread, and kola nut. You must go to Ijana Hill. Interrupt the ritual. And speak your mother's true name. But I don't know her name. Ijeoma cried. Mama Ijeoma smiled sadly. You will. When the time is right. The night came. The air was thick with heat and silence. Even the animals hid. Ijeoma waited, behind the banana grove, watching as Adaku left the compound in her red wrapper, barefoot, carrying a pot of dark liquid. She followed her, through narrow forest paths lit by fireflies and whispers. Each step felt heavier, but she held on to the charm. Finally, they arrived at Ijana Hill. There, in a ring of standing stones, stood the Midnight Circle. 10 women, faces painted, voices raised in chant. Adaku stood in the center, arms raised, the pot boiling with something dark. Tonight, she declared, we bind the soul of the weeping mother, and take her light. They began to chant louder. Ijeoma stepped forward. Her knees buckled, but she screamed through the pain. I know what you are. The chanting stopped. Adaku turned, eyes burning like coals. You dare speak during the rite, she hissed. I dare. Ijeoma shouted. And she struck the leather drum once. A bolt of wind tore through the hilltop. The flames dimmed. Ijeoma, a soft voice whispered from nowhere. The child turned, heart pounding. There, standing beyond the circle, was her mother. Dressed in white, her hands open. And suddenly, Ijeoma remembered the name. Amaka, she cried. A thunderclap split the sky. Adaku screamed. And the ground trembled beneath them. As the name Amaka echoed across the hill. The winds howled. The earth cracked beneath the stones. And Adaku stumbled backward, clutching her ears like the sound burned her. "No," she screamed, "that name is forbidden." But it was too late. A pillar of white light burst from the ground beneath Ijeoma's feet, lifting the girl into a soft glow. And from the shadows, her mother stepped forward, no longer a ghost, but a spirit made whole by truth. "Your blood remembers me," Amaka whispered, placing her hand over Ijeoma's heart. "You have broken the silence, and the chains." The midnight circle shrieked, their painted faces now twisted with panic. Some tried to run, but their feet sank into the earth like it had turned to mud. Others fell to their knees, howling prayers that crumbled in their mouths. Adaku fought to speak, but no words came. Her voice had been stripped. "You stole my name," Amaka said, her voice rising like a storm. "You fed off my light. Now you will return what was never yours." The boiling pot cracked. A wail rose from its center, high, sharp, and inhuman. Suddenly, black smoke burst into the air, forming the shape of a bird with no eyes, flapping wildly before vanishing into sparks. The ritual was broken. Adaku collapsed to the ground, her cowries falling one by one, like tears. And Ijeoma clutched her mother's spirit, sobbing. The silence was no longer heavy. It was healing. By sunrise, Ajano Hill was quiet again. The circle had scattered, some running deep into the forest, others crawling away in shame. Only Adaku remained, still on her knees. Her golden braids now hung like dead vines, her red wrapper torn, soaked in her own sweat and fear. Ijeoma stood before her, not with anger, but with something deeper, understanding. "Why?" she asked. Adaku lifted her head slowly. Her eyes no longer glowed. Now, they were empty. "They promised me motherhood," she whispered. "The Coven found me when I was only 16. I bled for weeks without healing. The priestess said I was cursed, barren. But the circle told me, if I gave them one daughter, I could feed on her light and never grow old." Ijeoma's stomach turned. "You wanted to feed on me?" Adaku nodded, a single tear trailing down her dusty cheek. "But I didn't know. Your mother's spirit was stronger than we expected. She fought me every night. Her prayers burned." From a leather pouch on her waist, she pulled out the black stone, the one Ijeoma had seen in the mirror. "I used this to trap her, in silence." She placed the stone in Ijeoma's palm. It was warm, beating like a heart. "I release her now," Adaku said, lowering her head. And with that, her body withered. The red wrapper turned to ash, and the wind carried her away. Word spread quickly through the village. The trees whispered the story before the people did. By midday, elders, hunters, and mothers gathered at Oba's compound, waiting for answers. Oba himself stood at the gate, confused, weak, but alive. The fog in his eyes had cleared, as though a spell had been lifted. "I dreamed of Amaka," he said, tears in his voice. "She stood in the sun, smiling, holding our child's hand." Mama Ijeoma stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "There are some evils," she said, "that wear wrappers and call themselves wives, but carry darkness in their breath. Oba was not blind by fault, he was fed dust by a spirit thief." Gasps rose. Some women began to weep. Others looked at their own homes, suddenly afraid. Ijeoma stood quietly beside her father, the black stone now cold in her pocket. Her spirit felt lighter, but her soul still trembled. One elder stepped forward. "What should be done with the other women of the circle?" he asked. Mama Ijeoma sighed. "They'll return," she said. "Darkness always tries again. But this time, we will not be silent. Let every girl child be taught to speak names. Let every stepmother be watched, not with hatred, but with wisdom." And the village agreed. At the shrine, a cleansing ritual was held. Mama Ijeoma led the ceremony, assisted by the priest, the midwives, and all the first daughters of the village, including Ijeoma. Each brought a leaf, a stone, a drop of river water. Together, they lit a great fire. "We burn what hid in shadow," the priest declared, "and we feed the light." Into the flames, they cast Adaku's broken cowries, the black feathers, and the last piece of the shattered mirror. The smoke rose high into the sky, forming shapes, faces. Some familiar, some lost. And then, it cleared. Ijeoma stood at the edge of the fire, holding the charm Mama Ijeoma had given her. She whispered her mother's name once more. Amaka. And for the last time. A warm breeze wrapped around her body. Like arms. Like love. "I forgive you," she whispered to the wind, not just for her stepmother, but for everything. The fire danced. And for the first time in weeks, Ijeoma smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because her spirit had survived. Months passed. The land healed. Ijeoma now lived with her father and Mama Ijeoma, who had taken her in as a spiritual apprentice. She learned the ways of herbs, roots, and listening. One day, while helping clear the backyard, she found something buried beneath the soil, deep under the mango tree. A box. Wrapped in goatskin, sealed with palm fronds. She called for Mama Ijeoma, and together they opened it. Inside were letters. Dozens of them. All written in her mother's hand. Journal entries, prayers, stories of her pregnancy, her fears, her dreams for Ijeoma's future. One passage read, "If anything happens to me, let my daughter know she carries my fire. Let her never fear a shadow, for she is light made flesh." Tears filled Ijeoma's eyes. She had found her mother's voice again. And this time, it would not be silenced. She gathered the letters in a new calabash, placed them on her shelf. And each night, she read one aloud, so her mother's spirit would never fade again. One night, as the moon rippled across the surface of the village stream, Ijeoma had a dream. She stood by the river's edge. Barefoot, dressed in white, her mother beside her, smiling. "Ijeoma," Amaka whispered, "I could not stay, but I was never gone. The spirits sent you fire, and you did not run from it. Now, you must lead others through it." In her hands, she placed a smooth white stone. It pulsed softly with light. "When you speak," Amaka said, "the daughters of the land will listen. Let no girl grow up blind to the spirits. Let no mother's name be forgotten." Ijeoma woke with tears streaming down her cheeks. In her hand, the same white stone from her dream. She wrapped it in red cloth and placed it beside her mother's letters. It was no longer just her story. It was a call. a torch for every daughter who ever sat in silence. Afraid. A year passed. And slowly, changes swept the village. Stepmothers were no longer feared by whispers, but tested by truth. Every marriage now came with a blessing ceremony, not just for love, but for light. Mama Ijeoma trained young girls to listen to the forest, to read the sky, to trust their dreams. And Ijeoma. She became the youngest spiritual apprentice in village history. She led the first gathering of daughters, a sacred evening where every girl lit a lamp in memory of a mother, sister, or guardian they had lost. They sang songs Amaka once hummed. They danced barefoot under the moon. And they spoke each name, aloud. One by one. The shadows lifted. Adaku was never seen again. Some say she wandered into the forest and became part of the earth. Others say she walks as a silent tree near Ijeoma hill, still listening. But one thing became clear. The circle had broken. And in its place, a new light had risen. Ijeoma was no longer the frightened child who clutched feathers and cried at night. She had become something more. A symbol. A spirit walker. A voice for those who had none. The villagers began to call her Ijeoma, the good child. And though she smiled at the name, she never forgot what it took to earn it. She still visited the mango tree every week. Still beat the leather drum once before prayer. And still kept the black stone, cold and silent, near her sleeping mat. Some darkness, she would say, doesn't die. It waits. But when we speak our truths, it loses its teeth. Children gathered at her feet now. Girls with scarred spirits, boys who had seen too much. She taught them to pray. To listen. To never ignore the cold silence in their bones. And when asked how she survived Adaku, she would answer simply, I remembered my mother's name. And she remembered me. Years later, when Ijeoma was grown, she returned to Ijeoma hill one final time. The stones were older now, covered in moss, but the memory of that night still lingered in the wind. She knelt at the same spot where her mother's spirit had risen. And closed her eyes. Mama, she whispered, I came back. Not because I'm afraid, but because I remember. A single black feather floated down. But this time, it was clean. No blood. No curse. She held it gently, kissed it, and placed it at the foot of the stone. Let this hill no longer hold fear, she said, but healing. Behind her, the wind stirred. It whispered no words, but it wrapped her like a shawl of peace. And as she walked back to the village, her footprints glowed faintly in the moonlight. The last curse had lifted. In the heart of every village, there is a story. A story of a mother who was silenced. A daughter who listened. And a stepmother who thought darkness could bury truth. But stories don't die. They wait. For a voice. Let this be your voice too. If you have ever felt afraid. If you've ever doubted the power in your name. If you've ever feared the silence in your own home. Speak. Speak the names of those you love. Speak against the shadows. Speak into the night, and trust the wind will carry it. And if this story moved you, if you felt the fire in Ijeoma's journey, then do this now. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a tale like this one. And share this story with someone who needs protection over their home, their children, or their spirit. Because sometimes, all it takes is a name to break a curse. And remember, you are not alone. If this story stirred something deep within you, if you felt the fear, the fire, and the final freedom in Ijeoma's voice, then don't let it end here. Let your voice be part of the light. Tap the like button right now and show the world that truth still matters. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story that awakens the spirit and protects the soul. Turn on the notification bell, because the next tale may hold the healing you've been waiting for. And most of all, share this story with someone who needs protection over their home, their children, their peace. Because sometimes, one story can stop a shadow. One voice can save a soul. This is not just folklore. It's a reminder. Your name has power. Your story deserves to be told. And your home deserves to be protected. Like, subscribe, share, and keep the light burning.